everyone, and welcome back to another one of our videos. Today will be the last of our videos on punishment, and specifically I'll be talking today about spanking and other forms of physical punishments, and just give some information about that and the effects it's likely going to have. So you might remember from my previous video that punishments, and any type of punishment, not just the physical ones, are typically not very effective and can often cause negative side effects like increasing aggressive behaviors in kids, or children distancing themselves from their parents or certain activities. But like I said, today I'll focus specifically on physical punishment because it can have additional negative side effects that something like reprimanding or removal of privileges doesn't typically have. And when I say punishment, or rather physical punishment, that includes anything that involves physical contact with your child. So for example, spanking. And this is also called corporal punishment. It's not the same as potential abuse because abuse are instances where there is extreme pain or there's physical marks or objects are being used. However, even though corporal punishment, like spanking, for example, is a fairly common practice and not considered abuse, it can still have many negative side effects. And as I'm discussing this, I will strictly stick to the research findings because I do acknowledge that there are religious, cultural, and personal differences when it comes to child discipline. But as we're talking about child discipline and behavior management in our overall series, it is important that we touch on spanking because it is such a common practice. So let me first explain what spanking is likely going to achieve. First, like other punishment, it's not likely going to stop the behavior that you're trying to stop in the long run. It doesn't really matter whether the spanking is mild or more severe. There's not really any research suggesting that it does anything to stop the behavior in the long run. And then second, spanking, it doesn't achieve something that's very critical to behavior change, and that's teaching the desired behavior. Now, when you're using punishment, your child may know that they did something wrong, they may even know what they did wrong, but they will not know what to do instead. They will only know what not to do or that they did something wrong. And when spanking is used frequently, and as kind of the main form of punishment, and when I say frequently, once a week or more is kind of what we're talking about there, there are also several negative side effects that we see frequently in the research. So first, your child is more likely to show an increase in aggressive behaviors themselves. So that includes kicking, hitting, pushing, anything like that. They're more likely to be disruptive or antisocial, both at home or in school. And speaking of school, their academic performance is also likely to decrease. That could be seen, they may have lower grades, or they may stop paying as much attention or attending class altogether. They're also likely to become more impulsive. So you may see things like not being able to control their emotions or not being able to wait their turn or share or things like that. And then they are also more likely than other kids to develop mental health challenges, both as a child and as an adult. And this could include symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, as they get older, potential substance use. And it could also include poor physical health. Or a more compromised immune system. And some of the hypotheses for why we see these poor physical health outcomes is that spanking or other physical punishment can cause stress that can potentially change a child's immune system permanently, which would then put them at higher risk for various diseases down the road. But of course, the negative side effects will not apply to everyone. However, when we weigh the positive effects of physical punishment against the negative ones, it is clear that the potential negative ones really outweigh the positive ones, seeing as it's not likely that the punishment will lead to any behavior change in the long run. And not only is physical punishment not likely to stop the behavior, it's potentially going to even increase the behavior that you're trying to stop. So, for example, if you spank your child for pushing his brother, his aggressive behavior is likely to increase instead of decrease as a result of the spanking. But we do know that spanking is used pretty frequently, so some of the reasons you may choose to use spanking or other corporal punishment is because it has those immediate effects. And it might stop the behavior in the moment, but like we said, it doesn't really stop it in the long run. A reason you might still use it, though, is because that immediate effect might be really reinforcing to you. And in turn, it might start to shape your own behavior, meaning that you see the immediate effect, so you're likely to use physical punishment again next time. And sometimes researchers call this the punishment trap. So you're kind of repeating a potentially ineffective behavior management technique because it gives you that immediate reinforcement. And then another reason you may choose physical punishment is because using or seeing aggression actually can activate reward centers in our brains. So it might have some just intrinsic reinforcement for us as well. So that's something to look out for. And you may wonder too if the behavior that you're spanking your child for will just get worse if you stop using corporal punishment. So I want to address that as well. And actually, research indicates that the opposite might be true. And it's been found that child aggressive and antisocial behaviors actually go down after laws are passed that ban corporal punishment in certain areas. And then also, if you are worried about the behavior getting worse, it's something that you really don't find acceptable that your child is doing, using the other behavior management techniques that we've discussed in all of our other videos will give you much more bang for your buck. And this includes things like positive reinforcement, like praise or points when you see your child doing that positive opposite behavior, which is that behavior that you would want them to do instead. So instead of pushing, I go talk to mom or dad, or instead of pushing, I go take a break. And that positive opposite behavior is what you really want to focus your attention on. So you give attention for that behavior, or you give praise whenever you see your child doing it. And also, if there are certain behaviors that you need to use punishment for, consider using really mild punishments, like a few minutes of timeout or taking the privilege away for a short period of time instead of the physical punishments, because that way you are decreasing those potential negative side effects, but still getting the potential positive effect of stopping the behavior in the moment. And then that is what we want you to really focus on, the positive opposite. And some of the other videos can help with identifying what the positive opposite is. It can help you figure out how to set up a point system or something like that. And as you're balancing your positive reinforcement with your punishment, if you do still use punishment, another tip there is just to make sure that the positive reinforcement outweighs the punishment. And usually we would like to see about a 3 to 4 ratio there. So for every time you give a timeout, we need to see about 3 praises or 3 instances of giving points for that balance to be effective. Otherwise, you might not see that behavior change, and you might still see those negative side effects that come from punishment. So that is all we had on physical punishments. And like I said, this was our last video on punishment. So we will move on to other topics starting next week. And as always, leave any questions you have in the comments, and also let us know if there are any specific behaviors that you're working on at home. And if you want to learn more or are interested in additional support with implementing any of our strategies, you can always learn more about our practice at GadlingGrowthGroup.com. Thank you.